Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on this Monday, August 22nd, 2022. And we try to do this each evening through a unique partnership with Alaska Public Media. And if you have any questions or interesting photos or observations you wish to pass on to me, you can reach me at peter.chan@noaa.gov. And for additional weather information on top of what I provide in this broadcast, you can go to weather.gov. That is the National Weather Service's online presence. It'll bring you to a point-and-click map of the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii to the lower left. And by clicking on anywhere in the country, you can pull up weather forecasts and any relevant watches, warnings, and advisories that are currently in effect. It's a great way to check up on family and friends who may live in other parts of the country. Big weather news has been the flooding in Texas around the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Anywhere from 6 to over 13 inches of rain reported from thunderstorms that produced torrential downpours that resulted in flash flooding. And we still see extensive flood watches there in northeast Texas into parts of northern Louisiana and western Mississippi. Further west, there are red flag warnings for the potential for lightning strikes that could cause fires in central Idaho, and also heat advisories and also red flag warnings for parts of south central California. Well, in Alaska, we have a wind advisory that'll be in effect until 7 p.m. this Monday evening for the east central Alaska range around Isabel Pass. This area could see southerly gap winds gust as high as 40 to 50 miles an hour. But otherwise, those winds should relax here by nightfall. And a flood advisory continues along the Kenai River below Ski Lac Lake through about the Funny River there above Soldotna for high and swift flows. I'll talk more about that in a moment. And then there's going to be some pretty good soaking rains pushing across parts of the west side of the state, especially the southwestern Brooks Range here Wednesday into early Friday. And the wet weather pattern will continue along the Gulf Coast. It's not going to rain continuously hard, but there are going to be a couple of more rounds coming up here between now and the weekend, especially centered on the north central Gulf Coast. Well, looking at some of the FAA webcams, Caltag is reporting light rain, some lower cloud cover, 57 degrees, and as I mentioned, there are going to be some steadier rains pushing in through that area of the state and northward up through Ambler and the southwestern quadrant of the Brooks Range here as we go through tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday. And some of the rains, many areas there will pick up well over 1 inch to 2 inches of rain. Eagle is enjoying partly cloudy skies, 73 degrees, in areas along the Elkhorn border down through Northway, as well as the mid-upper Tanana Valley are still seeing some temperatures in the lower 70s. The fire danger is still high there in parts of the mid-upper Tanana Valley, but nothing nearly as bad or as extensive as what we saw across the mainland back in June and early July. Further down toward the south, Kodiak getting some steadier rain and fog. The other day, Kodiak picked up like over 1.25 inches of rain with additional rain today. Meanwhile, Ketchikan has clouded over. Yesterday had a high temperature of 76 along with Klawak, and today we see a return of that lower cloud cover, and as a result, it's going to cap temperatures primarily in the 60s before some additional rainfall pushes back into areas of the Panhandle coming up here. So looking at current advisories and what have you, we have in yellow, the wind advisory in effect until 7 p.m. for the east central Alaska range, kind of centered there and around Isabel Pass for some gusty south winds of 40 to 50 miles an hour, but those winds will tend to fall off once we get toward dark. And then down along the Kenai Peninsula, we have a flood advisory for areas along the Kenai River from as I mentioned, below Ski Lac Lake to the Funny River above Soldotna. And then in the west, I highlighted the special weather statement coming up here for mid-late week, especially Wednesday, Thursday. Some steadier rains there along the southwestern slopes of the Brooks Range could add up in excess of 2 to near 3 inches, especially around and north of Ambler, which will cause rivers and creeks there to be on an upward rise. But here's the Kenai River below Ski Lac Lake. It is, as of this Monday afternoon, hovering right around minor flood stage. And this is the time of year very active on the river for the fishing season. A lot of people wading or going down in drift boats and rafts. So be aware of the higher water levels and swift flows. Many of the normal lower water crossing or wading areas are now too swift and difficult to try and attempt that, so be very careful if you're going to be wading the Kenai. And fire danger still elevated in areas of the middle upper Tanana Valley, still very high in some spots. We're not anticipating any significant problems, but just be aware of that if you'll be recreating in those areas. Otherwise, much of south central and other parts of the state, very low fire danger with all of the cloud cover and rain that we've received here. Looking at the satellite imagery, you can see more moisture being pulled northward. The low is sitting there south of the Alaska Peninsula and southwest of Kodiak Island, and with the circulation around it, that just pulls the moisture in off the Gulf. Low-level flow, southeast to south flow, pulls it back up against the Alaska range. And then as we look further west, there's yet other systems that are going to be coming in from the Kamchatka Peninsula and the western Bering. As that energy works its way eastward, there's going to be a pretty good push of milder, moist air that's going to try to work its way along the west-southwest coast here toward the end of the week and then spread inland. And that'll bring some more showers, breezy, and milder conditions. The air aloft is not nearly as cold as what it was a week or two ago. So at least it's allowed things to feel actually a little muggy around here. South central Alaska, Anchorage has received already now like third place for the wettest August on record, after July came in fifth place there for Anchorage. So I think somewhere on the order of 9.5 inches of rain has fallen in the Anchorage Bowl since the weekend of July 9th and 10th. So tonight, later tonight, early on Tuesday morning, that low pressure just kind of sits and spins there south of the Alaska Peninsula with an occluded front weakening and backing up into, as it kind of curls back to the northwest. We have another piece of energy crossing the central Bering Sea, dropping southeastward. That system and energy just gets incorporated into the mid-levels of the low that's sitting there south of the Alaska Peninsula. And what it does is just causes more moisture to pinwheel from the North Pacific up into the Gulf, and that's going to bring additional rainfall along the Gulf. Meanwhile, you see to the left of the screen that warm front crossing the far western Aleutians, approaching the west-southwest Bering Sea, and that's going to be a push of breezier conditions, wetter, moist air that's going to slam into the southwest coast and could cause some elevated surf along areas of the west and southwest coast as we get through mid and late week. But rains should pick up again, especially for Wednesday there from near Prince William Sound to Cordova and just west of Yakutat, as that low continues to just kind of sit there south of Kodiak Island. And showers will continue on up there, especially through the southwest Brooks Range, where some of the rainfall could be a bit heavier. Low temperatures Tuesday morning. We have your temperatures back now for south central. Lows mid-50s generally in the Panhandle, and lows around or just above 50 across much of south central areas. And then temperatures Tuesday afternoon could squeak out a 70-degree reading around Ketchikan or Metlakatla or Hyder. Otherwise, generally lower mid-60s in the Panhandle. Anchorage should be able to get temperatures back up in the lower 60s, 65 maybe at McGrath. And then Wednesday morning lows generally in the 50s in the Panhandle and near 50 around Anchorage and the coastal areas of the western Gulf, including Kodiak on up towards Seward. And temperatures Wednesday afternoon could get back up in the low 70s there in parts of the southern Panhandle. Otherwise, generally holding around or say 60 to low 60s across much of south central. In the north, coolest readings along the Arctic coast and north slope, mid-upper 30s. Still 40s to near 50 along the Yukon and Tanana Valley, some areas even above that. And Tuesday afternoon highs flirting with 70 there in east central areas from Fairbanks toward Eagle and down toward Northway. Otherwise, 40s along the far western Seward Peninsula. And Wednesday morning lows again, generally 40s across much of the region, with high temperatures generally above 60 south of the Brooks Range through the Yukon Valley, and in the 40s along the immediate coastal areas of the northwest and Arctic coast. Lows Tuesday morning will generally be lower 50s across much of the southwest interior, upper 40s Aleutian Chain. Tuesday afternoon we're looking at some 60s in the interior up the Kuskokwim River. and then 50s elsewhere. And then temperatures Wednesday morning should generally be upper 40s to lower 50s across all of Southwest down through the Alaska Peninsula. And then finally back up around or a bit above 60 again, especially working your way up through Bethel and Anvik, all the way up toward McGrath. So temperatures August 28th through the September 1st are expected to average above normal, centered on the mainland and including even areas of the southeast panhandle, and precipitation may average a bit above normal. The southeast interior along the Alcan border in through the panhandle, but otherwise I expect precipitation to be near normal throughout much of the mainland and slightly below normal as you run out the Alaska Peninsula.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Let's take a look at your aviation weather if you have a flight planned Tuesday into Wednesday. The main thing is we're going to continue to see a rather wet pattern along the Gulf Coast with some intervals of rain that will be enhanced at times Tuesday, Wednesday, and again late in the week into next weekend. Generally, low pressure is going to be over the Bering and down over areas of the North Pacific, south of the Alaska Peninsula, on up into the Western Gulf. So this is going to keep this wetter pattern going in these areas. Across the interior, we start out Tuesday morning MVFR conditions along Southside Brooks Range into the lower half of the Yukon Valley. IFR conditions anticipated just south of the Alaska Range, creeping up through the Mat-Su Valley, and also around Prince William Sound eastward in the north central Gulf. For Tuesday afternoon, widespread MVFR conditions south side of the Brooks Range down in through the west and southwest along areas especially south of the Alaska Range in through Prince William Sound eastward through much of the Panhandle. Wednesday morning, IFR conditions continue to lurk just along and off of the Beaufort Sea there along the Arctic coast, and then widespread IFR conditions are anticipated north central Gulf, including Prince William Sound, eastern Kenai down to the east side of Kodiak Island in through the central Gulf. And Wednesday afternoon, IFR conditions will expand there across the Gulf, especially western north central Gulf, and back up through areas, Copper River Basin south there at the Alaska Range, also extending in from the southwest from St. Matthew, Nunavik Islands, across the lower YK Deltas into Norton Sound, up across the central Brooks Range, and up toward the central Arctic coast around Utqiagvik. And Anativik Pass on Tuesday is anticipated to see MVFR conditions, as will Adigan Pass. Further south and west, IFR conditions, especially the east entrances of Lake Clark and Merrill early in the day, giving way to MVFR conditions. Rainy Pass, also IFR conditions in the morning, especially east entrance, giving way to MVFR conditions. Windy Pass, IFR early, especially as you get there near and south through the south entrance. Becoming MVFR with more in the way of VFR conditions the further north you fly there of the north entrance. Isabel Pass, look for VFR conditions becoming MVFR. And then Mentasta Pass, just generally be able to hold on to visual flight rules there. Further south and west, Tanita Pass, MVFR. And Portage Pass, look for IFR conditions, especially the eastern half on out through Prince William Sound, giving way to MVFR conditions midday into the afternoon. And Chilkoot and White should generally see MVFR conditions during the day on Tuesday. Freezing levels are rather high across the state. They do dip down to near and below 8,000 feet across the western mainland down into the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, but bump upwards to 10,000 feet along the Alcan border and to around 12,000 feet through the central Panhandle. Further west, they rise up to 12,000 and 14,000 feet there around the central and far western Aleutians. The greatest threat for some considerable moderate icing will be around areas surrounding Prince William Sound eastward past Cordova. And that will be, though, rather high up there because those higher freezing levels aloft 12,000 to a flight level of 18,000 feet. And areas of the interior south of the Brooks Range and along the Yukon River generally above 10,000 feet, and then out through the areas of the Bering above 15,000 feet, so generally well above most flight levels there for general aviation. The jet stream level winds 30,000 feet, 100 to 130 knot southwest jet core cutting up through the North Pacific into the Gulf, into the southeast mainland, and then on the backside of low pressure we find a broad area of 125 to 145 knot northerly wind max cutting across the western into the lower central Bering. 700 millibars, we see areas of winds 35 to 40 knots peppered across the mainland and coming into areas of the Gulf Coast with a broader area of 40 to 55 knot winds there through the lower Gulf and North Pacific, and then a broad area of 40 to 50 knot northwesterly winds there across the central and western Aleutians, and bringing it down to 3,000 feet. Some winds coming in there around the entrance of Cook Inlet to Lake Iliamna, up into the western interior, 35 to 40 knots. And this is going to translate to areas of turbulence on Tuesday. Parts of the lower arm, western arm of the Alaska Range into the southwest interior, also the lower Yukon Valley, surface to 4,000 feet, pocket of surface to 6,000 foot turbulence there along areas near just east of Prince William Sound along the north central Gulf, and then a broader area of surface to 3,000 foot moderate turbulence across the western and central Aleutians.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, joined again by Eric Stevens of GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And Eric, thanks so much for joining us again tonight.
Happy to be here, Dave.
Thanks, Eric. And we've been talking about the complex gathering of information from satellites, looking down on the surface of the planet, and some of those orbits around the planet work for Alaska, and some of them don't. There's a lot of challenges with those. How can we get better imagery for the poles and specifically for Alaska?
Right. Well, today we're going to talk about a very interesting kind of satellite orbit that has potential to be real helpful for the high latitudes.
Okay.
Especially us here in Alaska. Canadians, Russians, Norwegians will all be interested in this. The satellites are not in orbit yet. Now the future is uncertain, but it's possible, and if this happens, it will be wonderful for Alaska. It's called the highly elliptical orbit.
Oh, that sounds
it's interesting. Yeah. And I think first, to help our discussion, we should get back to some of Kepler's laws and how do satellites work.
Sure.
Kepler's first law, an orbit of a planet around a sun or a weather satellite around the Earth is not necessarily a circle, it's an ellipse.
Okay.
And the highly elliptical orbit takes advantage of this aspect. We're going to put the Earth in one of the ellipse and then stretch one of the foci of the ellipse and then stretch that ellipse out real far to make it highly elliptical.
And the foci is that bend part of the end of the ellipse. If you're going to stretch out a rubber band, that would be the center, kind of the stretchy part.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then Kepler's second law says that the closer something is to the thing that it's orbiting, the faster it goes.
Okay.
We see this in the solar system, that Mercury flies around the sun real fast. Jupiter, much slower. Jupiter's further away, it's slower. Mercury's closer in, it's faster. This happens with weather satellites too. Even satellites like the International Space Station, it's pretty close to the Earth. It goes around the Earth in only 90 minutes. That thing is moving. It's only 250 miles away. So how can we take advantage of these two aspects of Kepler's laws of motion to get better weather surveillance of Alaska? And this highly elliptical orbit is going to be the approach. So we have with us today our friendly planet Earth and our simulated satellite, the lid off of this salt shaker here.
Sputnik there. Yeah.
There it is. It's shiny, it's metal, it's space worthy. And what we want to be able to do is, could you have a satellite hover over the top of the world, up over Alaska? You can't really do that. Geostationary satellites have to be over the equator.
Okay.
So how could we almost solve this? And this is the tricky part. Maybe should we tilt the Earth over?
Focus on the pole. That's what we're trying to accomplish here, right?
So here we have the northern side of the planet, and we're going to trace out the orbit of a satellite with this salt shaker lid here. Now imagine a highly elliptical orbit. So let's put the Earth in one of the foci of the ellipse, and we'll have an imaginary foci out here. So the satellite will not go in a circle around the Earth, but will be in this long strung out ellipse. So the satellite will go...
Kind of like a racetrack.
Yes, there you go, like a racetrack. So it's an oval elliptical shape like that. And notice now that when the satellite's over here, we've got a nice view of the northern hemisphere around. There's Alaska, Russia, Canada, Greenland, all there. So that's the ellipse aspect of an orbit, Kepler's first law. The second law saying that when you're further away as a satellite, you go slower. And this we can take real
okay.
advantage of.
Huh.
Because the way this orbit works, when the satellite goes over Antarctica here,
Right.
it's going to be close to the Earth. It's
Okay.
going to be moving, whoosh, goes on by. And then as it comes out here, it will slow down. This increases what is known as the dwell time. The satellite will just hang here looking for hours at Alaska and the high Arctic. And then eventually it will come around and it will accelerate and whiz around the South Pole and then come back and hang here for a while because it's further away from the planet. It goes slower.
Yeah.
It has to. That's the laws of motion. And such like that, repeating.
Wow.
Now, the real important way to make this work is you have to have two satellites. So that while one is whipping around the pole, you've got the other one out here, and they work as a team. You could then get a series of images of Alaska that can be almost from a a constant frame of reference.
Right.
And you can loop them together to make movies. You can take a picture every 10 minutes, say, of Alaska, and then loop it, playing it at several frames a second. You could see the clouds whiz on by. You know, the Weather Channel, weather broadcasters in the lower 48 especially can show these movie loops from the geostationary satellites. In Alaska, we've never really been able to do that very well, especially in the higher, most northern parts of the state, because those geostationary satellites are over the equator. It's not a good view. And this highly elliptical orbit, whipping around the South Pole and then dwelling up here, would be a way for us to get that constant frame of reference and do really good weather surveillance over the Arctic, seeing where those storms are, where they're going. Nothing quite like a movie loop of the weather in time to really illustrate what's important, what's going on.
And compared to what we have right now, we just have small windows or snapshots of what's going on with the polar orbiters. We don't have that long range view that's looking top down to give us that complete motion picture that helps us understand so much of the atmosphere at this
There's
point.
so many different kinds of satellites. Each has their advantage. Each is important, and the highly elliptical orbit satellite will also fit into that scheme. It's a nifty idea to solve an Alaskan challenge.
That's fantastic. Well, that sounds really exciting. Again, kind of a satellite dream of the future to come. Okay, very good. Thanks for joining us today, Eric. We really appreciate the information. And if you'd like to learn more about what Eric does at GINA, at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, we invite you to visit the web address that you see on your screen there. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back to the last segment of our show, and starting with the sea ice edge before I give you the marine forecast. Well, the ice is certainly continues to slowly melt there along the Arctic coast. A few pieces floating there and about. The main pack ice has shifted well north there along the Arctic coast in the Beaufort Sea. Back up along the Russian coast, we still have some ice there, but again, it has actually melted off quite a bit more here over the past couple of weeks, and we just expect that slow progress to continue here through the late summer season. For the southeast panhandle on Tuesday, variable winds down there in the southern inner channels, only around 10 knots, waves a couple of feet. Winds will be southeast to south as you get north of Petersburg up through Lynn Canal with waves of 2 to 3 feet. Look for Craig to Sitka, southeast winds 15 knots, waves 5 to 6 feet, picking up to 20 knots from the south-southeast as you get especially west of Gustavus and off of Yakutat with waves 6-7 feet. On Wednesday, winds will come upward there along the outer Gulf Coast, especially northwest there of Sitka, 25 knots out of the southeast up through Yakutat with waves of 8 to 9 feet. Inner channels, southeast winds 10 to 15 knots, mid channels up through Lynn Canal with waves of 2 to 3 feet, but winds northwesterly there down around Ketchikan and Metlakatla, Dixon entrance with waves running a few feet. For the northwestern Gulf, on Tuesday, still some 30-knot winds there at the entrance of Cook Inlet, especially around Kamishak Bay. Otherwise, off the Kenai, southeast winds 15 to 20 knots, waves 6-7 feet. Southeast winds in Prince William Sound, and they're only around 10 knots, waves 2 feet. And on Wednesday, winds will be out of the east, 15 knots, Prince William Sound, with waves running 2 to 3 feet. Generally, east-southeast winds off the Kenai coast there, waves 6 to 7 feet, and look for winds to turn more north-northeasterly to 20 knots, with waves 4 to 6 feet, middle Cook Inlet, and as high as 6-7 feet down there toward the entrance. Across Kodiak Island on Tuesday, winds will be out of the east-southeast at 20 to 25 knots, waves 5 feet in Shelikof Strait, and 8 feet there off of the Kodiak Island there in through the western Gulf. And as we extend down along the Alaska Peninsula, winds will generally be 15 knots out of the east, northeast, even becoming variable north of Cold Bay, with waves generally running 2 to 4 feet. On Wednesday, winds will be kind of a mixed bag there around Kodiak Island, northeast 20 knots, Shelikof Strait, southeast wind off AKwx, and then off down along the south side, Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula and north of Cold Bay and the Bering. Winds will be 10 knots and variable. Waves only generally a few feet at best. Across the Aleutian chain on Tuesday, winds will generally have a westerly component at 15 to 20 knots, and waves running 4 to 6 feet on the North Pacific side and 4 to 6 feet on the Bering side. Winds will be picking up through the western Aleutians on Wednesday from the southwest at 25 to 30 knots, waves building 9 to 14 feet, especially west of Kiska. Otherwise, the lighter winds, the eastern Aleutians, kind of a variable winds at 10 to 15 knots there to start with, waves 3 to 4 feet around Dutch Harbor. And then along the western coast, variable winds are surrounding Nunavik Island through St. Matthew and down around St. Paul and St. George. Winds generally variable 10, 15 knots tops. Waves running a few feet. Look for north winds there through Norton Sound at 15 knots and waves a few feet. On Wednesday, winds are going to turn around to the south across much of the region. Generally just 10 knots through Norton Sound with 2-foot waves, but as you get off into the open waters of the eastern Bering, winds will be picking up 20 to 30 knots with waves increasing 4 to 7 feet, and a stronger frontal system will bring even stronger winds across this region, especially Thursday into Friday, and eventually could lead to some elevated surf along the YK deltas on up into areas of Norton Sound. For Tuesday, we are looking still for 30-35 knot winds along the Arctic coast, Prudhoe Bay through Kaktovik. They'll come down easterly to 25 knots Utqiagvik down toward Point Lay, and then look for southeast winds 10 to 15 knots through the lower Chukchi Sea before turning northerly through the Bering Strait on the north side of St. Lawrence Island with waves there a few feet. On Wednesday, overall, we're going to see winds across much of the region from the Arctic coast down through the lower Chukchi Sea and Bering Strait turn southerly, 10 to 15 knots there along the far northern coast, and 15 to 20 knots through the Bering Strait with waves generally running 3 to 4 feet. Quick check of the weather map Tuesday afternoon. We still have that one low sitting and spinning North Pacific, well south of the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island. That's just going to help fling more moisture up along the Gulf as another piece of energy drops southeastward across the central Bering. And then by Wednesday, there'll be a stronger, breezy, warm front working its way through the central Bering that will be plowing into the mainland later this week.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.